Imagine this. You're lying in bed, scrolling through your phone late at night, when a single notification hits you like a thunderclap. The U.S. national debt has just eclipsed $38 trillion, a number so colossal it defies comprehension, like staring into the abyss of a black hole that's about to swallow the American dream whole. This isn't some distant future warning. It happened on October 23, 2025, right under our noses. And the real nightmare? The government isn't scrambling to fix it. They're engineering a silent erasure, a financial sleight of hand that could vaporize the value of everything you've worked for. Welcome to the edge of economic oblivion, where trillions vanish not with a bang, but with the quiet inflation of your savings into dust. Stick with me. I'm about to pull back the curtain on how this is unfolding, step by step. Welcome to Finance Historian, where we dissect the hidden gears of global finance like detectives chasing shadows in a high-stakes thriller. If you're hooked on these deep dives into money's dark underbelly, hit that like button now. It fuels the investigation. And subscribe to join our worldwide crew of financial truth seekers. Drop a comment below. What's your city? And what's the time where you are? Let's see how far this story is rippling tonight. Let's kick things off by zooming out, painting the picture of just how precarious our footing has become. Picture the U.S. economy in 2025. Skyscrapers gleam in the sun, stock tickers flash green, and the headlines tout a robust recovery. Unemployment hovers low, corporate boardrooms buzz with record profits, and consumer spending feels invincible. But beneath this glossy surface, a monster stirs. That $38 trillion debt milestone wasn't a blip, it was a breach. To grasp its scale, consider this. It's roughly double the combined annual output of every nation in the European Union, a powerhouse of innovation and trade. Or think of it as over 20 times the UK's entire yearly budget, the kind of sum that could fund empires. And for the kids, every American under 18 is saddled with about $500,000 in unborn liability, a generational IOU that mocks the promise of opportunity. But numbers alone don't capture the dread. This debt didn't creep up overnight. It's been snowballing in a frenzy that's anything but natural. Just rewind 2 months to August 2025. We were at $37 trillion. By October, bam, another trillion piled on in a mere 60 days. That's outside the chaos of the COVID era, marking the blistering pace of accumulation in peacetime history. The Congressional Budget Office, those unflinching bean counters, pegged the growth at a jaw-dropping $69,713 per second. Let that sink in while you sip your coffee this morning. Every tick of the clock adds that much red ink. Last night, as you dreamed of stability, the debt ballooned by over $6 million. By the time you finish this sentence, it's climbed another few hundred grand. We're not on a slow descent. This is a rocket hurtling toward a wall labeled unsustainable. Transitioning from raw stats to the machinery grinding behind them, let's uncover the historical roots of this beast, because understanding the past is the key to spotting the traps ahead. America's debt story isn't new. It traces back to the Revolutionary War, when founding fathers like Hamilton borrowed to birth a nation. Fast forward through World Wars, Great Depressions, and Cold War arms races. Each era left its scar. But post-2008 financial crisis and the pandemic spending spree, something shifted. We didn't just borrow to survive. We normalized deficit upon deficit as a lifestyle. In the so-called good times of 2025, with GDP chugging along and jobs plentiful, you'd expect a breather. Instead, the velocity is ramping up. The CBO forecasts we'll blow past $40 trillion by 2027, just 2 years out. That's layering on $10 trillion every 5 years now, a cadence that's quickening like a heartbeat in panic. Why does history whisper warnings here? Because past empires, from ancient Rome drowning in denarii to post-World War I Germany hyperinflating its way to ruin, collapsed not from invasion, but from fiscal folly. The U.S., with its reserve currency status, has dodged that bullet longer than anyone. But as we pile debt during booms, imagine the storm when the inevitable bust hits. A recession could spike unemployment, crater tax revenues, and ignite spending on safety nets like unemployment aid and social programs. Revenues dry up while outflows flood, turning challenging into catastrophic. The math doesn't bend. It breaks. Now, let's escalate into the heart of the crisis, where the real shadows lurk. The exploding cost of servicing this monster. Forget the principle for a moment. The interest alone is the silent assassin. In fiscal year 2025, the government forked over more than $1 trillion just to keep the lights on for bondholders. That's not a typo, and it's not hyperbole. This sum eclipses the entire defense budget. No aircraft carriers, no global basing, just pure interest. It dwarfs Medicare's tab and trails only Social Security as the budget's behemoth. Visualize your tax dollars. Nearly 1 out of every $5 you send to DC vanishes into this void, buying zero infrastructure, zero education, zero security. It's the ultimate dead-end expenditure, like feeding a ravenous machine that spits out nothing but IOUs. Dig deeper, and the mechanics reveal a vicious cycle rooted in rates. The average yield on our marketable debt sits at 3.38% today, a stealthy climb from 1.58% 5 years back. In a $38 trillion pool, every single percentage point hike tacks on $380 billion in yearly interest, enough to fund NASA's wildest dreams or bail out entire states. Who's behind this? The Federal Reserve, our economy's unelected guardian, jacking rates to tame inflation's fire. Noble intent, right? But here's the sting. Those hikes are supercharging the debt bomb. Higher rates mean pricier new borrowing, and with deficits unyielding, we keep issuing bonds hand over fist to cover the old ones. This is the government's exquisite trap, a self-made labyrinth of dependency. To pay interest, they borrow more, pushing supply into an already jittery market. Bond buyers, those savvy global investors from Tokyo to Riyadh, sniff the risk and demand steeper premiums. Rates creep higher, costs spiral, and the loop tightens. Default? Unthinkable. It would shatter the dollar's throne, trigger worldwide panic, and rewrite global finance. So instead, they borrow to tread water, but the water is rising faster. It's exponential, not linear. A 2025 economy strong on paper is already wheezing under this weight. What happens when yields spike to 5% or 6% in the next downturn? Annual interest could devour $2 trillion, crowding out everything from innovation grants to disaster relief. As we hurtle toward the implications, let's connect the dots to why this isn't some abstract wonkery. It's a direct assault on your wallet, set to detonate in the here and now of 2025. The powers that be aren't blind, they're strategizing. No grand plans for austerity. Slashing spending would ignite political firestorms. Tax hikes? They'd throttle growth and alienate voters. Betting on endless expansion to outrun the debt? Optimistic, but fragile in a world of supply shocks and geopolitical tremors. So, enter the sophisticated escape hatch, a policy playbook that's documented, deliberate, and devastating. Through subtle financial engineering, inflation targeting, quantitative easing on steroids, maybe even yield curve control, they aim to erode the debt's real value without firing a shot. Picture it. The Fed subtly gooses money supply, letting inflation simmer above target. Your savings account, once a 2% earner, now buys 20% less groceries after a few years. Bonds you hold? Their fixed payouts get diluted as prices soar. Pensions, 401ks, Social Security adjustments, they all lag, transferring wealth from savers to the state. The government's $38 trillion burden shrinks in real terms, paid not with pennies from taxpayers, but by inflating away the obligation. It's the ultimate wealth transfer. The middle class foots the bill through eroded purchasing power, while elites with hard assets like real estate or stocks ride the wave. This isn't wild speculation. It's echoed in Fed minutes, Treasury white papers, and economist whispers. Mechanisms are activating. Look at the recent bond buybacks and liquidity injections. The timeline? Accelerating, with midterm pressures and global rivals like China testing our resolve. Why does this matter right now, in the fragile calm of 2025? Because we're at the inflection point. The economy's strength is a mirage propped by cheap debt. Peel it back, and the cracks show. Geopolitical flashpoints, from trade wars to energy crunches, could tip us into recession, amplifying the interest squeeze. Your retirement nest egg, your kid's college fund, the home you're eyeing, they're all collateral in this game. If inflation stealthily climbs to 5 to 7%, that $100,000 in bonds today might feel like $70,000 in buying power tomorrow. And the middle class? Will wake up poorer, angrier, divided, while the debt evaporates on paper. As we wrap this investigation, pause and reflect. $38 trillion isn't just a ledger entry. It's a reckoning for how we've lived beyond our means, chasing short-term highs at long-term peril. The U.S. has thrived as the world's banker, but banks that overextend eventually face the run. This financial engineering might buy time, averting outright collapse, but at what cost? A hollowed-out middle class, eroded trust in institutions, and a dollar's dominance hanging by a thread. The choice ahead isn't inevitable doom, it's awareness. Arm yourself with knowledge. Diversify beyond fiat, question the narratives, and demand fiscal sanity from leaders. We've engineered miracles before. Now, let's engineer a way out before the trap springs shut. Thanks for joining me on this dive. Hit subscribe for more unfiltered truths, like if it hit home, and comment your take. Is the debt bubble about to burst? See you in the next breakdown. Stay vigilant. Imagine this. In the shadowed halls of power, where decisions echo across generations, a silent storm is brewing. One that could quietly erode the savings of millions while the lights stay on in Washington. It's 2025, and the U.S. economy teeters on the edge of a fiscal precipice, where borrowing isn't just a habit, it's a trap. What if I told you the government has a secret weapon, a way to wipe the slate clean without firing a shot? But like all nuclear options, it comes with fallout that hits everyday Americans hardest. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the debt spiral that's accelerating toward catastrophe and the radical escape hatch they're preparing to deploy. Let's step back and paint the picture of how we got here. Picture the U.S. Treasury as a family maxed out on credit cards, juggling payments just to keep the roof overhead. Over the last decade, they've racked up trillions in debt to fund everything from wars to welfare. But now, in 2025, the interest on that mountain, already ballooning past $4 trillion cumulatively, is starting to crush the budget. It's a vicious cycle. To cover those rising payments, they borrow more. That flood of new bonds floods the market, spooking investors who jack up yields to compensate for the risk. Rates climb, making every dollar of debt costlier, demanding even more borrowing. It's not hyperbole. This is the debt spiral in motion, a feedback loop that's gripped economies from ancient Rome to modern Argentina. I remember poring over the numbers late one night, the glow of my screen illuminating the stark reality. The Congressional Budget Office's latest projections aren't whispers, they're a siren call. Interest expenses? They're forecasted to surge from that $4 trillion decade mark to a staggering $14 trillion over the next 10 years. That's not evolution, it's an eruption. By the early 2030s, those payments alone could eclipse spending on national defense, Medicare, and education, combined. The federal budget, once a sprawling canvas of priorities, shrinks to a monochrome nightmare, interest and Social Security dominating, everything else starved for scraps. Infrastructure crumbles unfunded, innovation stalls, and the safety nets fray. This isn't distant theory. It's the arithmetic of austerity sneaking up on us. But here's where the intrigue deepens, where history whispers warnings we can't ignore. Governments don't just fold when the math turns ugly. They've got aces up their sleeves, forged in the fires of past crises. Enter debt monetization, the alchemist's trick that saved empires and shattered currencies. It's deceptively straightforward. When private lenders balk at the risk, the government turns inward, borrowing not from Wall Street sharks, but from its own creation, the central bank. No fanfare, no auctions, just digital sleight of hand. The Federal Reserve conjures reserves from nothingness, credits the Treasury's account, and snaps up bonds like a loyal insider. The government gets its cash infusion to keep the lights on, without hiking taxes or slashing programs that voters love. From the outside, it looks clean. The debt ledger swells, but it's an IOU to a family member. The Fed, after all, remits its profits right back to the Treasury. Interest paid circles back like a boomerang, meaning the government's essentially wiring money to itself. No real wealth shifts. It's all shadows on a spreadsheet. Critics call it printing money, and in our pixelated world, that's spot on. No greenbacks roll off presses, but electrons multiply, inflating the money supply by the exact sum of the new debt. It's elegant, almost poetic, until you zoom out to the consequences. We've danced this dance before, and the scars linger. Flashback to 2008. The housing bubble burst, markets froze, and panic clawed at the foundations. The Fed didn't hesitate. Through quantitative easing, or QE as it's branded, they unleashed trillions, ballooning their balance sheet from under $1 trillion to peaks near $9 trillion by 2021. They scooped up not just treasuries, but corporate paper too, claiming it was all about liquidity, stabilizing the chaos. But peel away the jargon, and it's monetization by another name. Without those buys, bond auctions would have tanked, rates would have spiked, and the recession could have morphed into depression. Then came COVID, another round of QE steroids, trillions more to plug the holes from lockdowns and stimulus checks. The Fed insisted it was temporary, secondary market maneuvering to avoid direct Treasury handouts. A semantic dodge? Absolutely. By vacuuming bonds from private hands, they engineered fake demand, propping rates artificially low and letting the government borrow on the cheap. The suspense builds because the playbook hasn't been shelved. It's evolving. Fast forward to December 10, 2025. In a low-key press release that barely rippled the headlines, the Federal Reserve unveiled reserve management purchases. $40 billion a month in Treasury bills kicking off December 12th. No emergency label this time. No QE stigma. Just steady, methodical intervention. The effect? Identical. Fresh money floods in, bonds get absorbed, and the debt machine hums on. This isn't coincidence. It's choreography. The stage is set for what could become the grandest debt-erasing illusion in U.S. history. A gradual, controlled erosion of the dollar's value that shifts burdens from borrowers to savers. Now, let's escalate the stakes, because this isn't abstract anymore. It's barreling toward 2025's fault lines. Inflation, that stealth tax, is the hidden blade. As the money supply balloons, each dollar buys less groceries, less housing, less retirement security. Savers, think retirees on fixed incomes or middle-class folks with 401ks, watch their nest eggs deflate. Debtors? They win big. Mortgages, student loans, corporate balance sheets lighten in real terms as prices rise. It's a massive wealth transfer, veiled as policy. And lurking in the wings is modern monetary theory, or MMT, the intellectual fuel for this fire. Dismissed by some as academic fantasy, it's no fringe gospel. It's seeping into the veins of policymaking. I first encountered MMT in the dusty tomes of economic history, but its core punch is revolutionary. For a sovereign issuer like the US, with the dollar as global reserve, bankruptcy is a myth. Debts in your own currency? Just keystrokes away. That $38 trillion national tab? Not a crisis, but a feature. Numbers to manipulate, not chains to break. No need to find repayment funds. Print and spend. Washington's embraced this quietly, from pandemic largesse to green energy bets. But deploying it at scale? That's the pivot point. In 2025, with deficits yawning wider amid geopolitical tensions and slowing growth, MMT isn't theory. It's the escape hatch from the spiral. Why does this matter now, you ask? Because the canary in the coal mine is singing. Bond vigilantes, those market watchdogs, are stirring, yields creeping up as faith wanes. Geopolitical rifts, from trade wars to energy shocks, amplify the risks. If private buyers sour further, monetization isn't optional, it's inevitable. And once entrenched, reversing it? Near impossible without a recessionary purge. The Fed's recent moves signal they're prepping the ground. $40 billion monthly is a toe in the water, but scale it up, and the dollar's throne wobbles. Global holders of U.S. debt, China, Japan, pension funds, might dump if they smell inflation engineered. Currencies crash, trade imbalances explode, and the American dream? It gets pricier for everyone. As we hurtle toward this crossroads, pause and reflect. This isn't just numbers on a screen, it's the architecture of our future. Generations built prosperity on trust in stable money. But what if that trust is the first casualty? The debt spiral warns of restraint, yet the nuclear option tempts with ease. Monetization as savior, inflation as the price. In 2025, as the Fed's machine whirs, we're all investors in this gamble. Will it steady the ship or capsize it for the vulnerable? The choice echoes through history. Empires rise on sound finance, fall on illusions. The revelation? Power's true currency isn't gold or greenbacks, it's our vigilance. Stay sharp because the bill's coming due, and it's on us to demand better. Imagine a world where the U.S. government's $38 trillion debt isn't a ticking time bomb. It's just a line item that can be erased with a few keystrokes. But what if I told you that this seemingly magical solution is already reshaping our economy in 2025, pulling the rug out from under everyday Americans without a single vote in Congress? Buckle up, because today I'm diving deep into the shadowy mechanics of modern monetary theory, or MMT, and how it's colliding with something even more audacious. A quiet revolution in how we value our national treasures like Bitcoin and gold. This isn't just theory. It's the blueprint for the greatest wealth transfer in history, and it's unfolding right now. Let's start at the beginning, back when the pandemic hit like a freight train. Picture this. The economy grinding to a halt, millions out of work, businesses shuttering overnight. In a panic, the government unleashes trillions in relief. Checks in mailboxes, loans to keep the lights on, stimulus that felt like a lifeline. But here's the twist I couldn't ignore. Where did that money come from? Not from some hidden vault of gold or a mountain of tax dollars. No, it was conjured into existence. Digital ink on a ledger, courtesy of the Federal Reserve. I remember watching the markets that year, heart pounding as the debt clock spun faster than ever. Traditional economists screamed bloody murder. Hyperinflation was coming, they said, a repeat of Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe. But it didn't happen. Prices ticked up, sure, but nothing apocalyptic. That's when I first suspected. Maybe the old rules don't apply anymore. This is the core of MMT, a framework that's been whispering in the halls of power for years, but exploded into the spotlight during the crisis. Forget what you learned in school about balanced budgets and living within your means. For a country like ours, sovereign over its own currency, debt isn't a chain, it's a tool. The U.S. owes everything in dollars, and we control the dollar printer. When bonds mature, the Treasury doesn't scramble for funds. It issues new ones, and if needed, the Fed steps in to buy them up with freshly minted money. No default risk, no bankruptcy court. It's like having an infinite credit card with no interest rate cap, as long as you watch the inflation gauge. But let's peel back the layers, because this isn't as straightforward as it sounds. I dug into the history, tracing MMT's roots to post-Keynesian thinkers in the 90s, but it echoes even further back, to wartime spending in the 1940s, when the U.S. funded World War II by expanding the money supply without the economy imploding. Fast forward to 2020. $6 trillion in COVID packages, no corresponding tax hikes or austerity. The Fed's balance sheet ballooned from $4 trillion to nearly $9 trillion in months, snapping up treasuries like they were on sale. Was this MMT by accident or design? Insiders I've spoken to off the record say it was the latter. Policymakers testing the limits, proving you could flood the system without the dam breaking. Now, escalate the stakes. In 2025, with the debt hitting $38 trillion and climbing, this isn't experimental anymore. It's doctrine. The Fed's recent moves tell the story. They started small again after tapering. $40 billion a month in Treasury purchases, framed as supporting the recovery. But I see the pattern. It's the same playbook from 2020. Dip a toe, gauge the reaction, then dive in. Markets barely blinked this time. Yields dipped, stocks rallied. If history rhymes, that $40 billion swells to $80, then $120 until the Fed's absorbing the bulk of new issuance. The government spends freely on infrastructure, green energy, whatever the polls demand, and the central bank makes it possible. Debt grows, but so does the money supply. The real limit? Not solvency, but inflation. If prices heat up too fast, pull back. Hike taxes to drain cash from circulation, or trim spending. Manageable, they say. Terrifyingly simple. Yet, as I pieced this together, a darker truth emerged. One that MMT cheerleaders gloss over in their TED Talks and op-eds. This isn't free money. It's a stealth tax on everyone holding dollars. When the Fed prints to buy bonds, it injects liquidity into the veins of the economy. More dollars float around, chasing the same houses, groceries, and gadgets. Each one loses a sliver of value. Your savings erode. Your fixed income buys less. The government's burden lifts, but it's shouldered by retirees watching their nest eggs shrink, young families priced out of homes, wage earners treading water as costs climb. I've run the numbers. Since 2020,
Inflation has quietly shaved 20 to 25% off the dollar's purchasing power. That's trillions transferred from savers to the state, all under the radar of monetary policy. No fingerprints, no uproar. It's elegant, insidious, a heist where the vault is your wallet. And it's accelerating. By mid-2025, with geopolitical tensions flaring, trade wars with China, energy shocks from the Middle East, the pressure mounts. The government can't just monetize forever without a smokescreen. Enter the next layer: strategic asset revaluation. This is where it gets cinematic, like a thriller plot unfolding in the shadows of Washington. The US isn't just printing. It's reimagining its balance sheet, turning seized assets into phantom wealth to offset the debt mountain. Take Bitcoin, for instance. The feds have stockpiled around 210,000 coins from busting dark web rings and crypto scams, worth about $21 billion at today's $100,000 a coin mark. Peanuts against $38 trillion. But what if I told you they're not selling? They're hoarding, positioning Bitcoin as a strategic reserve akin to our gold stashes.
Whispers in policy circles suggest an announcement soon. Official recognition, perhaps tied to national security. And here's the sleight of hand. They'll revalue it on the books, not at volatile market rates, but at a strategic premium. Say, $500,000 per coin for accounting purposes. Overnight, those 210,000 BTC morph into $105 billion in assets. Poof, $84 billion in new value. No extra digging required. It pads the balance sheet, justifies more spending, and makes the debt look less daunting. This isn't pie in the sky. It's precedent in action. Flashback to 1934, the depths of the Great Depression. Banks failing, breadlines snaking through cities, the dollar in freefall. President Roosevelt, in a bold stroke, seized private gold and revalued the official price from $20.67 an ounce to $35, a 69% jump. The Treasury's 8,133 tons suddenly gained $2.8 billion in value. That's over $60 billion today. It didn't add a single bar to the vault, but it flooded the system with seigniorage profits, funding New Deal programs that pulled America from the brink. Debt was devalued, recovery sparked, all through accounting alchemy. Today, the stage is set for a sequel. Our gold reserves, still 8,133 tons tucked away in Fort Knox and other vaults, sit on the books at a laughably outdated $422 per ounce, unchanged since 1975. At market prices hovering around $2,500, that's a $700 billion undervaluation. Revalue it now, bump the official price to, say, $10,000 an ounce, and you've unlocked trillions in gains. Combine that with Bitcoin, maybe layer in other digital assets or even strategic metals. The Treasury declares it, Congress nods along under the guise of modernizing reserves, and the debt phantom shrinks. It's fiscal judo, using the system's own weight against it. Why does this matter now, in 2025? Because the pieces are aligning faster than you think. Inflation's cooling from its post-COVID peaks, but cracks are showing. Supply chains strained, labor shortages biting. The election cycle looms, with candidates promising the moon. Universal healthcare, student debt forgiveness, climate megaprojects. Without MMT and revaluation as backstops, none fly. But with them, the spending spree continues, eroding the dollar's fortress status. Foreign holders, China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, might dump treasuries if they smell the inflation ploy, spiking rates and crashing markets. Everyday folks, your 401k weathers nominal gains, but real wealth? Fleeting. I've seen the models. Sustained monetization could halve the dollar's value in a decade, hitting the middle class hardest while the elite hedge with assets. So, as we stand on this precipice, I can't shake the unease. MMT promised liberation from debt's shackles, a way to fund progress without sacrifice. But in practice, it's a mirror reflecting our deepest fears. Unchecked power, hidden costs, a system rigged for the house. The Fed's bond buys are just the appetizer. Revaluation is the main course, served with a side of illusion. Will it save us or unravel everything? History whispers warnings, from Rome's debased coinage to the 70s stagflation nightmare. The choice is ours, but only if we see through the fog. Stay vigilant, because in the game of money, the house always wins, unless we rewrite the rules first. What do you think? Salvation or slow-motion robbery? Hit the comments and subscribe for more uncovers on the forces shaping our financial future. Imagine this. You're staring at the U.S. Treasury's balance sheet, a fortress of numbers that supposedly guards the world's safest economy. But hidden in plain sight is a ticking bomb, a relic from 1973 that's worth peanuts on paper, but could unleash trillions in the blink of an eye. What if I told you the government is gearing up to rewrite those numbers? Not with real wealth, but with a sleight of hand that could rewrite the rules of global finance. Welcome to the shadow game of asset revaluation, where the dollar's throne is starting to wobble, and the fallout could hit your wallet harder than you think. Let's pull back the curtain on the situation at hand. Here we are in 2025, with the U.S. economy humming along on the surface, stocks climbing, tech booming, everyday life feeling almost normal. But beneath it all, the national debt has ballooned to unsustainable heights, a mountain of IOUs that no amount of tax hikes or spending cuts can climb. The Federal Reserve, that all-powerful architect of money, has been buying up treasuries like there's no tomorrow, propping up the system with freshly printed dollars. It's a delicate dance, one that's kept the lights on through pandemics and recessions. Yet, as I've dug deeper into the archives and policy whispers, I've uncovered something chilling. This isn't just about borrowing more. It's about conjuring value out of thin air to mask the cracks. To understand how we're here, we have to rewind to the ghosts of financial history. Not dusty textbooks, but real moments of desperation that shaped empires. Flash back to the Great Depression, when the U.S. stared into the abyss of bankruptcy. Gold was the anchor then, just as it is now. In a bold move, the government devalued the dollar against its own gold reserves, spiking the official price overnight. Billions materialized on the books, a magical offset to the crushing debt. It wasn't theft or fraud, it was accounting wizardry, plain and simple. Fast forward to today, and the echoes are deafening. Our 8,133 tons of gold, Fort Knox's gleaming secret, sit undervalued at that ancient $422 per ounce, a statutory fossil from 1973 when Nixon severed the gold standard. Meanwhile, market prices have soared to $2,800 an ounce, screaming for an update. The room for maneuver? Enormous. Picture the Treasury announcing a revaluation to $10,000 per ounce for reserve purposes. Poof! Those holdings leap from a measly $11 billion to over $2 trillion. It's not mining new gold. It's relabeling the old stuff to balance the ledger. But here's where the intrigue thickens. This isn't happening in isolation. Layer on Bitcoin, that digital wildcard the government's been eyeing warily. Whispers in policy circles suggest a similar revaluation for crypto reserves, potentially adding trillions more. Combined, these moves could fabricate several trillion in assets through nothing but ledger entries. Suddenly, the balance sheet looks robust, debt obligations appear tamed. The Fed keeps purchasing treasuries, monetizing the debt with abandon, while the public sees strength where there's sleight of hand. The real value of that debt? It's eroding, inflated away in a sea of new dollars. I've pored over the Fed's minutes and Treasury reports. They're not hiding it. They're telegraphing it to those who listen. Now, let's escalate this. The ripple effects aren't confined to Washington. They crash across borders, eroding trust in the dollar's ironclad status. Foreign governments clutch about $7 trillion in U.S. SECs, 1.5 treasuries, once the gold standard of safe havens. But as America monetizes and revalues, those bonds pay back in dollars worth less, purchasing power gutted by design. It's a quiet betrayal. Nations that bet big on Uncle Sam's promises wake up to devalued scraps. No wonder the exodus is accelerating. China slashed its treasury holdings by over $100 billion last year alone. Russia, post-Ukraine sanctions, purged most of its dollar reserves, opting for harder assets. Even Saudi Arabia, the petrodollar's birthplace, now takes yuan for oil, ditching the dollar mandate. These shifts aren't knee-jerk reactions or geopolitical tantrums. They're calculated defenses against the inflation storm brewing in the West. Zoom in on the BRICS bloc. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And you'll see the counteroffensive in full swing. They've rolled out payment networks that sidestep dollar dominance entirely, like a financial underground railroad. China and India swap goods in rupees and yuan, no greenbacks required. Brazil's real fuels regional deals, while Russia handles 90% of its BRICS trade in local currencies. This de-dollarization isn't fueled by animosity, it's raw survival instinct. As the U.S. primes its debt-eroding machine, these powers are fortifying their flanks. And gold? Central banks are hoarding it like never before. The World Gold Council charts show purchases hitting decade highs in 2024 and into 2025. China's central bank snapped up bullion for 11 straight months through September, ballooning its gold stash to over $280 billion in value. This isn't casual shopping. It's armor for a world where the dollar's might crumbles under deliberate devaluation. But wait, the threats compound. Enter the electric vehicle revolution, a silent assassin for the petrodollar empire. In 2025, 1 in 4 cars sold worldwide is electric, batteries charging up a seismic shift. Oil demand plateaus after 2026, maybe dives by 2030 as EVs proliferate. For half a century, the petrodollar pact, oil traded in dollars, pumped endless demand for U.S. currency. Weaken that, and the foundation shakes. Fewer barrels mean fewer dollar transactions. With alternative systems enabling oil deals in yuan or euros, and central banks swapping treasuries for gold, dollar demand evaporates. Those trillions in overseas dollars? They rush home, flooding U.S. shores. The money supply doesn't just grow from Fed printing. It explodes with repatriated cash, potentially doubling or tripling the inflation surge from debt monetization. Feel the urgency yet? The government's clock is ticking louder than ever. They've got maybe 5 to 10 years before de-dollarization hits escape velocity and international demand for dollars vanishes. Exporting inflation, the perk of reserve status, evaporates too. Lose that, And America faces the harsh reality of any debt-ridden nation. No more kicking the can. That's why the machinery whirs now, while the dollar clings to its crown. Revalue assets, ramp up treasury buys. It's all about squeezing the last drops of power from the system. This isn't conjecture. It's the great repricing unfolding in real time. Economists murmur about it in hushed tones, but the signals blaze bright. Fed policy briefs, Treasury leaks, CBO forecasts, they're roadmaps for anyone tuned in. Mark my words, within 18 months, those monthly Treasury purchases balloon from $40 billion to $100 billion. The Fed will spin it as stability measures, reserve bolstering. The headlines? Prudent policy in turbulent times. But you and I, peering behind the veil, know the truth. It's the final act in a drama that's been building for decades. So, as we stand on the edge of 2025's financial frontier, ask yourself, what's your move? In a world of revalued illusions and shifting reserves, the only true anchor might be the history we've ignored and the warnings we've dismissed. The repricing is coming. Will you be ready when the numbers rewrite everything? Imagine this. It's early 2025, and you're staring at your bank account, convinced the economy's finally turning the corner after years of chaos. But what if I told you that right under your nose, the greatest financial sleight of hand in U.S. history is already unfolding? One that will quietly erode the value of every dollar in your pocket. I'm not talking about a market crash or a bank run. This is deeper, more insidious. The slow, deliberate melting away of America's $38 trillion debt mountain, disguised as salvation for the system. Buckle up, because by the time you finish watching this, you'll see the hidden gears grinding, and why you can't afford to look away. Let's start at the beginning of this nightmare, or what the powers that be call prudent policy. Picture the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, that massive ledger of assets propping up the economy. Just a couple of years ago, it was shrinking as the Fed pretended to unwind the excesses of the pandemic era. But now, in the shadow of persistent inflation and geopolitical tremors, something's shifting. Within the next 18 months, those monthly Treasury purchases I mentioned earlier, starting from $40 billion, will balloon to $100 billion. The official line? It's all about market stability and keeping bank reserves flush. The evening news will nod along, framing it as the grown-ups in the room steering the ship through choppy waters. But peel back the curtain, and you'll find it's the opening act of a high-stakes drama where the government and the central bank are locked in a dance no one wants to admit is happening. This isn't some knee-jerk reaction to a recession. It's the evolution of a strategy that's been simmering since the financial crisis of 2008. Remember quantitative easing? Those rounds of bond buying that flooded the system with trillions to keep the lights on? They were the beta test, experimental, limited, and always with an exit strategy whispered in boardrooms. Hashtag exclamation point at Meta, quote, pause, quote, colon, quote, sex, quote, colon, 1.5, QE1, QE2, QE3. Each one bought time, but they also planted the seeds of doubt about the dollar's invincibility. Fast forward to today, and the game's changed. The U.S. debt has exploded past $38 trillion, fueled by endless spending on wars, pandemics, and entitlements that no politician dares to cut. Interest payments alone are devouring budgets like a black hole. Historically, nations facing this kind of overload have two paths: slash spending and spark riots, or print their way out and invite hyperinflation. But America? We've got a third option: courtesy of our status as the world's reserve currency. Or at least, we did. Here's where it gets chilling. The hidden mechanisms clicking into place like pieces of a vast, invisible machine. Debt monetization isn't a new idea. It's as old as fiat money itself. Think back to the Weimar Republic in the 1920s, where printing presses ran wild to pay off war reparations, turning wheelbarrows of cash into wallpaper. Or closer to home, the Continental Congress during the Revolution, issuing Continentals that bought nothing but became a synonym for worthlessness. But in the modern US, it's far more sophisticated, wrapped in layers of financial engineering. The Fed doesn't just buy bonds outright. It funnels money through primary dealers, repos, and offshore swaps, all while the Treasury issues debt that no one else wants at sustainable rates. Foreign buyers, China, Japan, the Saudis, are pulling back, spooked by our deficits and the weaponization of the dollar in sanctions. So who steps in? The Fed itself, indirectly monetizing the debt by soaking up treasuries like a sponge. It's not printing money in the cartoonish sense. It's a velvet-gloved heist, where new reserves enter the banking system, banks lend them out, and the money multiplier turns billions into trillions rippling through the economy. As we push toward 2027, this process accelerates with terrifying precision. Debt projections aren't guesses. They're roadmaps drawn by the Congressional Budget Office, warning of $40 trillion by then if trends hold. That's not hyperbole. It's math. And when that tipping point hits, the illusions shatter. Default? Forget it. It would cascade into a global meltdown. Stock markets evaporating, pensions wiped out, the dollar's throne toppled as allies and adversaries alike dump U.S. assets. Political power? Gone overnight, with riots in the streets and America's influence reduced to a footnote. No, the real play is full-throttle monetization, riding the wave of lingering international demand for dollars. Think about it. Oil trades in bucks, SWIFT runs on them, and even as trust erodes, alternatives like the yuan or crypto aren't ready to replace us. This window, maybe 2-3 years at most, lets the Fed expand its balance sheet to $15 trillion or more, swapping worthless IOUs for fresh currency that props up the facade. Now, let's escalate this. The financial implications aren't abstract. They're a slow-burning fuse to your doorstep. Every treasury the Fed buys injects liquidity that bids up asset prices, stocks, real estate, commodities, creating an illusion of wealth for those already holding them. But for the average saver? Your checking account, your 401k bonds, your fixed income dreams, they start to bleed value through the back door of inflation. It's not the 8% spikes we saw in 2022. It's stealthier, a 3 to 5% annual creep that the CPI underreports by design. Why? Because admitting the truth would spark panic selling, bond yields spiking, and the whole scheme unraveling. By 2027, that $38 trillion debt doesn't default. It dissolves into thin air as the money supply surges 20 to 30%. It's the ultimate wealth transfer, from your future purchasing power to the government's coffers, funneled through Wall Street's pipelines. Corporations get cheap loans to buy back shares. The ultra-wealthy park gains in hard assets like gold or Bitcoin that outpace the dollar's decay. And you? Your groceries cost 50% more. Your mortgage payment doubles in real terms, and Social Security checks buy a shadow of their promise. The mechanisms are live. Automated trading algorithms front-run the Fed's moves. Hedge funds arbitrage the spreads, and central bank swaps with the ECB and BOJ provide global cover. Timelines? They're compressing. Supply chain snarls from tariffs, energy shocks from endless conflicts, all feeding the debt beast faster than planned. Why does this matter now, In 2025, when the headlines scream soft landing and AI boom times. Because the choice isn't coming, it's here. The Fed's already testing the waters with those expanding purchases, and Congress is too paralyzed by partisanship to rein it in. Election cycles loom, but no candidate touches the sacred cow of spending. Global shifts amplify the urgency. BRICS nations are de-dollarizing trade, hoarding gold, and pushing digital currencies that chip away at our monopoly. If we don't monetize while the world's still hooked on dollars for safety, the cover vanishes and we're left exposed. This is the inflection point, the last gasp before the repricing hits escape velocity. Ignore it, and you wake up to a world where your savings fund someone else's empire. Spot it now, and maybe you pivot. Diversify into inflation hedges, question the narratives, demand accountability. As I wrap this up, let me leave you with a stark reflection. This isn't conspiracy, it's consequence of decades of living beyond our means, of leaders kicking the can down a road that's now a cliff. The great repricing has begun, a seismic shift where debt becomes dollars and dollars become dust. But knowledge is your shield. Will you stand by as the theft unfolds, or will you act before the curtain falls on the American dream we thought was unbreakable? The clock's ticking. Your move. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe, share your thoughts below, and let's keep uncovering the truths they don't want you to see. Thanks for watching.